and you need to kind of managing up your mentorship. So when you approach somebody, you want to propose specific goals or specific ideas. It's not a point blank, do you want to be my mentor?
Welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast. I'm Kim Skorupski. On today's episode, we have my dear friend, Dr. Giorgio Raimondi. Giorgio, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kim. How are you doing?
I'm better now that I get to see your smiling face. Giorgio is one of our faculty members who always has a smiling face. And ever since on the podcast, I switched from pure audio where I had a microphone and people would call in by Skype, and now we're doing by Zoom. I think it's so much more fun for me, the extrovert, because I get to see the other person. And now we're just recording on Zoom. But Giorgio has one of these faces that no matter when you see him or what he's doing or what's happening, he has a happy face. Why don't you tell the Faculty Factory audience who you are and what you do here at Hopkins?
Sure, be happy to. And I can guarantee I'm smiling while I'm saying these things. So I am an assistant professor in the Department of Plastic Reconstructive Surgery here in the School of Medicine at Hopkins. I co-direct as an associate director what we call the VCA lab, which is an acronym for the Vascularized Composite Allotransplantation lab, a big name for a laboratory that deals with the transplantation of limbs, which is a topic that is of interest to this department. And our laboratory is a multi-PI, multidisciplinary laboratory that focuses on research related to multiple aspects of this discipline of surgery. So we have PIs that work in aspect of microsurgery, tissue engineering and regeneration, nerve research. And when I take over our mostly the project that related to immunology of transplantation. So while we reject the transplant, and my interest is in defining a more effective and smart strategy of treatment, of alternative strategy of treatment of transplant rejection, so immunotherapies. And we do this through multiple collaborations with the fantastic people that are here at Hopkins and outside. So that's what keeps me happy.
Yes. Thank you, Giorgio. So I was going to kind of introduce what you're doing, but I think you should do it because it's your creation. So why don't you tell people what you're going to share with us today?
Well, thank you. And first of all, thank you again, Kim, for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts here in your podcast. I really hope this can be of help for other people. So the initiative that I wanted to share with your listener is something that we call the MAP meeting, MAP. And it's an initiative that I started, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one doing this. It's just that we give it a structure and a name, I guess. But it's practically a very structured way of performing a peer mentoring-based kind of meetings, so that people that are going through the process of career development, we are oriented as junior faculty at our early stage. I don't see why this is going to be applied at any stage, honestly. But it's this idea that, at least to me, I feel like mentoring is one of the most important things for having a meaningful and successful career in academia and outside. And together with other faculty, junior faculty, we found ourselves sometimes talking around lunch and so forth, like, I wish I had a better mentoring, or my mentor cannot really help me on this, or I don't have a mentor. I know that there is a lot of emphasis on mentoring and the idea that we need better systems in academia. And of course, this is not trying to replace that. We still need more experienced investigators to mentor us. But the idea, our initiative was, well, can we run some sort of meeting or initiative that is recurring, that it's not just a one-time thing, where we can help each other as peers. And this was particularly felt here at Hopkins, I feel, among scientists like me, that I'm a basic scientist and I'm in a clinical department, where we feel that despite all the care or the interest that there is from the department in providing us with mentorship, there is practically not the knowledge of what is needed for a basic scientist to keep progressing in his or her career. And this feeling was shared by other faculty members in other clinical departments that were performing basic science. And so we decided, why don't we do something? Why don't we get together? I remember we discussed this. Actually, we came to you, the original group, that wanted to do something. And by discussing also with people that I think you brought us to talk with people in the School of Pharmacy, no, in School of Nursing, I think it was. And they gave us this idea of having regular meetings where the people attending the meeting can bring up ideas of issues and discuss them and have a forum of conversation where people feel safe, which is one of the key aspects in discussing this issue and also considering possible solutions and then following up on this idea. So elaborating on this suggestion and so forth, and the connection, as you mentioned too, came in my mind to the WAGs and this idea of establishing really a structure of regular meetings with very specific directions on what you do during those meetings. And the part that is very important also is the accountability part, that every follow-up meeting, you need to report on the suggestion that were given in the previous one. So we decided to try this experiment and say, can we get together on a WAG style, but instead of using it for writing and being more productive in our writing, we use this as a venue for giving and receiving mentoring and feedback on ideas and issues. So that was the general idea. And I have to say, it was great. We started it. That was what we call the version 1.0 of this initiative, which lasted, I think, for a year and a half, and then kind of fell apart. So that taught me a couple of things. And that's actually how we went into what I call the version 2.0, which is the one that we call the map. And this idea that we need to have an even better structure and better idea on how to perform this meeting. And the lightning bolt, honestly, to be totally honest, is that, again, I did not invent anything original myself. I just put things together. An additional input came from when I discovered that in the industry, there is this initiative that is called the mastermind groups. And after learning how those were done and what people were doing, which comes from listening to podcasts, I always love to nerd out on podcasts. I realized, why don't we do something like that for our map meeting? And they have very specific structure and very specific rules that you need to follow. I didn't charge anything because I know the mastermind groups, oftentimes you need to pay something to belong to one. So the idea of the map is still away from making money out of it. But the whole idea is this concept of having a very distributed time of that 1 hour that now we dedicate to this. And it's organized in the following way. You have a first 15 minutes where people can talk about the high and lows. Things are going well, not. But the important thing is that during that 15-minute time frame, generally the person that talked the previous time is supposed to report on what he or she has done. And that's the accountability part that we can go back to. And the important part is that there is half an hour or so where a person, which happens on rotation, is put on what we call the hot seat. And so this person presents either an issue or an idea to be discussed. And the other people will then chip in and say, okay, if it's an issue, trying to troubleshoot, and if it's an idea, giving feedback. And the idea is that then there is the final 15 minutes where sort of a plan is put in place, or at least a framework, and say, well, based on this discussion that we had, we think you should be doing this. And that defines your homework for the things to do and then what to report on the following meeting. And the way that we organize this, it's once a month we meet. Of course, now it's happening virtual. We started in person, but it works perfectly fine virtual. It's much better in person, to be honest, at least from my perspective. And that's how it works. It's a small number of people. We found that somewhere between 5 and 7, it's probably the ideal group of people. It doesn't have to be all people in the same department. Like in our case, actually, almost every person is in a different department of the people that are currently in this version 2.0. And I think it's working pretty well because, honestly, this thing has been running for the past 5 years. It's the same group of people, well, except for 2 people that actually left Hopkins, but we were considering keeping them on the loop. But has been working for this past 5 years. So I think something is working there. And I have to be honest, the most important thing is this idea that I I'm pretty sure everybody feels like they're getting something out of that. So, one of the key things that they say in relationship, it's a great relationship if every person in the relation would say, oh, I benefit from this. And the other person, oh, no, I'm the one benefiting from this. So in the mock meeting, the sense that I feel is that everybody is always learning something. And it's a great venue because I'm a strong believer of the idea that you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And it comes out so often during these meetings when I'm here, other people say, wait, what? You can do what? Or wait, you will deal with that in that way. I never thought about that. Or, wow, it's possible to do this? I never considered that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you to share maybe an example, G, of that 30-minute portion of what happens when maybe somebody is raised an issue, either an idea or they want to brainstorm creative solutions. But I want to just clarify for the audience that the MAP, the MAP, stands for Mentoring Accountability Peer Group. And you mentioned kindly that you kind of riffed off of the WAGs. WAGs are writing accountability groups. And the WAGs are 5 to 7 people who meet for 10 weeks at a time, 1 hour a week, in the same kind of a structured hour where the first 15 minutes is accountability. What did you say you were going to do last week in terms of your writing habit? What did you do the past 7 days? And then there's a timed communal writing 30-minute segment in the middle where everyone just does their own writing practice. And then the 15-minute wrap-up at the end of that is, okay, what did you do during that 30 minutes of timed communal writing that we all had together, and what will you do next week? So you're exactly right. And the structure, I think, is what is good. And you said something else that was really important that I hope people heard. And that is that you said it, I think, twice, that this is nothing like earth-shattering, groundbreaking. But sometimes when we just put structure around something, it can be a very, very simple concept that it really is what we need to put us over the line in terms of getting started on, for example, developing a new habit. Because you just reminded me when we first started WAGs, a mentee back in Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, Dr. Karma Fouché, she's the one who came to me and said, I don't feel like I'm writing enough. I'm not as productive, scholarly as I want to be. What should I do? And I'm like, well, I don't know. There's got to be literature around there. And then, long story short, anybody can go to wagyourwork.com and see the website and all the materials. Again, the wagyourwork.com. But we followed Paul Sylvia's book, How to Write a Lot. And Paul Sylvia talks about the process of writing. What we did is we wrapped structure around that. So we created the WAGs to give structure to the process and then hence the outcomes. The classic Don Obedient, structure, process, outcomes. And so what I love about what you did is taking something that's just it's simple. It's a small group of people building community, building relationships. What you said so nicely is capitalizing when you don't know what you don't know. And so we learn from each other's mistakes, from our successes. There's so much wisdom we all have that since it's common sense to us, we think, well, everybody must know that. So that's what I love about building small communities of engagement. And I also love how you notice that, gosh, there's got to be another forum for us to do this. You're noticing that when people are asking questions saying, oh, I wish we had this, or I wish we had that. Again, another reminder, necessity is the mother of all invention. Necessity is the mother of all invention. You saw a need and you came up with this. So kudos to you. And I'm going to stop yammering. And I want you, G, to give us maybe an example or two of what kinds of conversations happened during that 30-minute chunk. Can you think of anything?
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's the beauty. I can tell you that over the 5 years that we have been running this, I've heard and I have discussed so many different things. That starts with, of course, at the beginning, probably you're a little bit hesitant in being vulnerable, which is one aspect, and eventually that makes those meetings even more meaningful later on. I would say, for example, I can tell my first topic, paradoxically, that I posed was like, how do I find a mentor? So I asked at the mentoring meeting, how do I find a mentor? And because I told, as I mentioned in the beginning, and my concern was I don't feel like I'm receiving enough basic science-oriented mentoring, not out of fault of the people that were trying to help me here, but just because it's not their expertise. But I also had this issue, and that's how I was explaining to them. I feel weird in approaching somebody that doesn't know me and practically send a letter and say, hey, do you want to be my BFF? Because I really need you to tell me if I'm screwing this up or if I'm doing the right things here and there. And I felt like I cannot approach a professor and say something like that. So I honestly put it in those terms, and we started having a conversation. And some people were like, why not? Why not? Just the worst thing that can happen, they either don't answer to you or they answer to you and say, well, let's have a discussion and see what comes out of this. But in the discussion, I remember also something came up more of you still need, and I learned this also from Dr. Yusem, you need to be proactive on your mentoring, and you need to kind of managing up your mentorship. So when you approach somebody, you want to propose specific goals or specific ideas. It's not a point blank, do you want to be my mentor? It's more like something like, I believe you have great experience on this. I'm encountering some difficulties in facing this aspect. I don't know, the organization of my time management for writing grants. Would you have some advice? So approaching somebody. So this idea of how to approach a potential mentor and then discussing among them the people that I was thinking of approaching, and everybody pitching in their comment, and which is another thing that I have to say, going back to your original question on the characteristic, the key aspects for a successful map is that people need to feel safe in sharing their thoughts and their opinion, because of course, if you feel like I'm going to say something, but then somebody's going to take it over as somewhere else, of course, you don't give honest feedback, which is absolutely needed there. And so we were talking about different people and our opinions, and I can sense that person, it's not that good in mentoring. It's a great scientist, but not that good at mentoring. Or this one is fantastic. So we have discussion like that. That was an example, but the topics were the most disparate, from having issue with personnel in the lab and say, look, this student is not doing the things that I recommend doing. How do I direct them? Or what can I do? Or issue, conflict in the lab, either with other people. A topic that came out many times was we're having issue with collaborators. They're not doing their part of the job, or they're delivering something different, or they're acting weird. And we can talk freely during those sessions, because of course nothing comes out of that, but discussing, look, and the suggestion could be, there is no solution for this right now, but you really need to talk with your chair, or you really need to talk with Kim, or you really need to talk with somebody in HR and let them know. So the solution could be suggested on other things to do outside. We don't necessarily find the solution during the meeting, but it's great, the idea that, of course, you have these sessions where you have people that back you and say, oh, okay, yes, I see the problem. But the other important thing, and it gets confused at times, that this is not just to talk about problems. And that's one of the things that I often reiterate. And there is another topic that we need to talk about, but the map is not a venting session. Yes, sure, we have used it for that sometimes. And it was fantastic during the COVID when all the labs shut down. We discussed, we kept going with the COVID and, with the map meeting during COVID. Shut down, and many of the sessions were not as structured. It were just an hour where we were chit-chatting, because it was nice to talk with others and say, hey, what are you going through here, and how are you dealing with that, and hey, be strong, it's okay, we can do this, and how about, have you thought about this? I'm not going to say we find solutions for everything, but it's a great support. It's moral support too. But one thing that I extremely important, and you mentioned that when you were talking about the WAGs too, the nice thing about the WAG is that it's a defined amount of time. So once people decide to commit to that, there is a commitment. The map, we didn't feel like making a commitment and say, oh, it's going to run for 5 sessions, or it was more an experiment of, let's run this and let's see. But I've noticed that it requires, and this is not to say anything bad about others, it's just how the dynamics work. It requires a very determined person to keep the organization and the calendar of this event for happening. That's part of how the first version, the variation of the map, didn't pan out that nicely and died after a while, because it wasn't really there that there was one person that was very interested into, okay, a week before the meeting, I'm going to send a reminder to everyone, and then making sure that there is a person on the hot seat and that person is ready with a topic, which ideally you want to share before, but it doesn't have to be. And then making sure that everybody's on board, that everybody's going to be there. No, not that many people want to be burdened by that because it's more of a burden. Honestly, I realized I take out so much from the MAP meeting that I decided to be that person. It was just a personal decision and say, I'm gaining so much by talking with these other peers that are going through other experiences so that I can learn from that the cost of being the organizer and going after people and say, hey, next week it's your turn. Are you available? And do you have a topic to discuss? It's such a little price to pay, but it's necessary because unless you find a group of other people, of course, I guess it will depend on their type. But if you leave it out there, after a while, it's going to die out for sure.
Well, that's so generous of you. And I'm not surprised, but you're exactly right. Every effort requires a leader and someone to own the process. And things will slide if there's no consistent effort at sustaining something. And then, you follow the recipe. I mean, when people would say, well, do WAGs work or when don't they work? And to me, it was always, they don't work when you start deviating from the routine, from the schedule, or from I would always give the example of you can't, join a gym and say, oh, that gym was lousy. I didn't get in shape. I didn't get fit. I didn't lose any body fat. And people say, oh, well, what did you do? Well, I didn't go. I mean, I joined, but I never went there. Or if I went, I hang out in the locker room and chit chat. You have to really work the system. And so I think it's, you're very generous. And a lot of us wish that we had resources or people who would organize these things for us. But oftentimes I'm like you, G. I'll be like, well, by the time I send an email to a program coordinator asking them to do A, B, and C, I could have, done that myself in like 30 seconds. And to me, you're right. It's a minimal effort for a bigger gain. So that return on investment is worth it to me. So thank you for doing that. And also for being honest and talking about that you need somebody who's going to step up.
I really hope other people do that. I know that we are trying, so we had organized a lunch and learn in the past, and we can be discussing more about this. I think people don't really think in those terms, to be honest. There is still pretty imprinted in the culture in academia that, of course, you need to make it on your own. You need to show and demonstrate that you are a great scientist or clinician. And it's still, we struggle with the idea, well, we all need help. And again, what I'm really constantly always kind of pursuing the idea, I need to learn more from other people and hear constantly right and left the most successful people, and that's way beyond academia. They all had a coach, they all had a mentor, and people that vouched for them. I'm not saying that the MAP meeting, maybe it's that, but it's an incredible tool, I feel. And oftentimes people, again, don't think about the usefulness of that until we had member of the MAP meeting at the beginning being very hesitant and say, I don't know if I really need that. And I have a good mentor structure from my department where I have assigned mentors and so forth. So I feel like I'm probably pretty covering my bases. And then coming to the meeting, and after 3 or 4 sessions, they're like, oh, no, I'm here because I'm hearing all things that I never thought of, or I do have some problems that I found that harder, or it's even better, I get more prepared in my meetings with my mentor because I've discussed some things with you. So I really encourage other people to think about it. And it's not that difficult. It's definitely, we do it once a month, and of course people can decide it. We tried once every 2 weeks, and we felt like it was a little bit too rushed and too much on people. The ideal would probably be every 3 weeks, but the way that 3 weeks work, it's so complicated that we ended up resolving on the one time a month. But of course, there's freedom there, and now everybody's on Zoom. It should be even easier to find the time and get in contact. It doesn't even have to be at the same institute, to be honest. That would be an interesting experiment, I think.
Hey, Giorgio, does anyone ever talk about family stuff, or is it all career?
It's everything. It always starts with newer people, at least. I mean, I'm making it sound like I've been doing this for decades with so many different people, but it always starts with work-related stuff, but now has gone into personal issues. We have talked about family. Of course, with COVID, we were all like, what are you going to do with your kids when they're here at home? Of course, that was the biggest topic. And talking about, is the university going to help us with childcare or with mental health? Because also we have some issue here and there. So no. The topic of dealing with some issues outside of work is always welcome and has appeared. And it goes on personality, also how people feel comfortable in sharing or not. But we did have sharing moments of very personal stuff that went on. And it's great because at the end, of course, we feel like there's this connection with these people that it's not just bound to the meeting. I know that I can reach out to them. I wouldn't say they're my best friend, but I definitely admire them and have great consideration because of the conversations we had. That's definitely beyond work, just work.
But that building relationships, building communities, being engaged, involved, connectedness, that belonging, that's what Tate Shanafelt talks about in Burnout, that if you don't have friendships or relationships or connection, it's easier to be disengaged from our work.
But so the other thing that I feel like it's important, it goes back to the accountability part. So we always look forward to hear what the person has done at the following session. And I think that's an important driver. This goes back to the utility of it. It's not just, we give you advice once and you decide to follow or not. But now the following session, you're supposed to say, and everybody's there waiting and say, okay, tell us, what about that issue? Like, did you deal with that collaborator? Did you talk with your chair? Did you talk with that personnel that was giving you issues? Have you done that? So it's going to happen. And you're going to either be applauded for having taken some initiative or in a very fun way, you might be shamed. Say, well, you didn't do that.
Right. That was one of the principles of the WAG. That whole accountability component was what lit the fire under your tush, because you don't want to be the one who shows up to the meeting going, oh, I said I was going to do what? Nah, I didn't do that. Another really important point you made is that some people think, well, I don't need that. This MAP, this mentoring accountability peer group, because I have mentors, I have a team, I'm good, I've got myself covered. And then you mentioned that, that we learn so much from each other. And what you said then when I asked you about family and, family work integration, that a lot of these things, I imagine personally, many of us wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable talking to our mentors about that. With our mentors at work, oftentimes, they're senior to us. Many of them are. And a lot of us, I can imagine, especially early career faculty members, they don't really want to get into, personal home life issues and childcare and partners and home and parents who are sick or healthcare issues. They kind of want to keep it right to the, nitty gritty, academic medicine to be taken seriously. So that's another safety, another beauty part of this is not only is it a safe for the faculty members, but it opens up a whole other way to learn and then feel that, academic medicine can be so isolating and lonely, and you feel like the imposter syndrome. So yes, it's safe to have other friends and people who are along the same line of trajectory as you are and not that far up the academic rung, and maybe you've experienced some things, but then it gives you an opening for things that you wouldn't feel comfortable talking to senior people or people who are supervising you, that you maybe feel intimidated by them. So I think that the MAP is just great because it serves a bunch of different functions. And one of, that important thing of feeling like there are people who are like me. I'm not alone,
Mm-hmm. I agree. If I can comment on that, I would say then that there are two problems that are generally that, of course, talking about personal issues, and it's not just an academia thing, but it's often, unfortunately, perceived as a weakness and say, what, you have problems? What's wrong with you? And it's so sad because, unfortunately, that's how we are raised and stuff. So, and I don't want to be too philosophical here, but as you were saying, it's an issue related to that loneliness and so forth that we sometimes feel at work. And I'm not saying this is a cure, but it's definitely helping. However, it's not going to happen automatically. My impression, and I think I mentioned that earlier, I don't remember who taught me this, but I was saying to have a true relationship with other people, probably you need to be the first one to be vulnerable and share something personal. So that would be my recommendation, that people early on, at least one person in the group, takes the courage to take the hot seat and say, today we're going to talk about this topic. And it's not necessarily working, but it's like, I am taking care of an aging parent and I feel overwhelmed with the load that I have. What would you recommend doing? Because this is killing me. And over there, there is the opening and say, wow, yeah, we all have some problems. And then somebody else sharing, look, I have a problem. It's not the same, but it's this, and this is how I dealt with that. And it's beautiful because at that point, yes, sure, there is a better connection and more meaningful kind of helpful interaction, because at that point you start talking about some of the real problems that people don't bring up, and maybe you're overwhelmed at work, but it's not because of work or because of the structure of work. Yeah. So I totally agree. And again, I don't want to sound like, oh, this is fantastic, we should all do it. It might not be for everyone. I mean, there are people that receive beautiful mentoring, and I envy those people. And not saying that I didn't have great mentoring in my life, but definitely there's some aspects missing here and there that I felt like I needed. But absolutely, some lucky person or super smart people are there and they already know what they need to do and how to deal. Great for them. I would love the idea of learning from them. So if you can still come to them up and teach me something, I will be all ears.
Okay. That there's something really, really unique when there are people who are like you, because you can talk to a mentor who you think, oh, that's a professor, tenured, hundreds of publications, a lifelong history of grants. You could talk to a coach who maybe doesn't know academic medicine or doesn't know the Hopkins or fill in the blank, whatever university you are, doesn't know the culture. You can talk to a therapist, and the therapist doesn't know anything about maybe academic medicine or doesn't know about your stressors at work. And you could talk to your director or your program chairperson or your department director, all these people. And there's it seems to me there would be a certain level, or your pastor or your rabbi, there's a certain level of, disconnect that they don't necessarily, part of us may not feel like they get us because they don't understand what my job is or how tough it is or the challenges. But there's something unique when you're with peers. They're like, oh yeah, I get that. And you have confidence that they do because they're doing the same, or that they're in the same environment, the culture, they get that. And you don't have to go into all the excruciating detail of what is a grant? Well, a grant is, or what's a paper? What do you mean a paper? And you're like, and so then it kind of adds to your frustration because you don't understand it. Like, it's so easy. My friend just said the other day, I was talking to her about something at work, and she's an architect. And she said, well, if you get fired for being associate dean for faculty development, you're already a professor, right? Can't you just be a professor? And I'm like, yeah, I can just be a professor, but if who's going to pay for my salary? If I don't, get grant funding to provide 100% of my salary, I'm not going to have a job. And she said, really? I said, yeah, there are lots of faculty. We have to provide the money to support our salaries. And she said, wow, who knew being a professor was so hard? And I was like, yeah, I did. I said, it's not an easy. And so people outside of our industry think that, it's they just don't understand. So I think that's what's so unique about the mentoring accountability peer group, the map that you created, is that it gives you so many layers of, aha, I'm home. People get me. I get them. I feel understood. I feel heard. So congratulations. I think it's just wonderful.
Thank you. Well, as I said at the beginning, I feel like I'm the one that is benefit the most out of it, but definitely not in a selfish way. But I totally agree. And in relation to that, one point to that I made at the beginning, I explained that as of now, it has been mostly people like in our group being related to basic science, but I don't feel like it has to be. As you said, it's important probably that it is a group of people that are connected to the environment where you work to give you proper feedback. So the idea, it could be also clinicians that are in the group. So a mixed group, and it doesn't have to be that the map needs to be revolving toward a specialty or a specific discipline. At the same time, you just need to find the right people. And from that perspective, I've been lucky, I feel, but I hear a lot. This goes back to the idea of the mastermind groups that sometimes you need to reshuffle. and be honest. So some people, there is chemistry in the group, and you keep going. And if there is no chemistry, be brutally honest. And I don't know if as I said, I never had to deal with that. And I don't know if like me as the kind of organizer will be the one going to them and say, hey, we really think you're not really benefit from this, and maybe we should reshuffle how we do the map. Maybe you should look for another group to join, or I'm not sure if that will happen naturally, but I highly recommend keeping an eye on the dynamics, because you definitely want to have a group of people that feel that connection coming after a few sessions, as you said, that I understand is that I hear you, I know what writing a grant or negotiating is about, or feeling like, oh my God, how am I going to cover my salary? And it needs to be there for this part. Then, of course, there is other network that you need to have, other circle of friends and peers outside of that. But it complements very nicely, I feel.
Very nice. Yeah, I totally agree. You need people to be dedicated to the group. You can't have like a running club with 5 people and 3 of the people don't show up, or they show up randomly. And you know how you start a meeting and 2 people walk in late, and then the leader of the meeting will start way back in the beginning. Oh, sorry, you just walked in late, Kim. Well, what we were talking about, and everybody in there also in the room goes, oh, we got to go all the way back to the beginning because you're late. So it really disrupts the flow when you have someone in a small group who is not a regular attendee. They're not really invested in it. They're not doing their homework. You're right. There's a lot about the culture of a group. It's really important to get people who are going to be in it to win it. They're committed to it. They're believing it, and they're going to be all in. So that's so important. Well, Giorgio, I'm going to leave you with the last comment. If you have anything you'd like to share with the Faculty Factory podcast before we close out.
First of all, thank you again for the honor of talking here with you. It's a fantastic platform. And I would just start by saying to everyone, think about not necessarily of setting up a map group, but really think about don't be afraid to show that you need help. And a map meeting could be the solution, and something that eventually we can help organizing, and that's a possibility eventually in the future. But my recommendation to everyone is that the resources are coming there. There's your podcast, there is the office, in our case, the Office of Faculty Development. There are so many resources that I feel like that are underutilized. The people that are even not sure what they need and what they want to do. Don't be shy. Ask. Reach out and see what happens, and sometimes put some initiative in that, and other times just go with the flow. But I would say explore. That has been pretty exciting and a learning experience that no matter what, I've treasured. So I highly hope that other people will go that route too.
Thank you, Giorgio. Faculty Factory podcast friends, you've been learning from Dr. Giorgio Raimondi, my smiling friend here at Hopkins. And thank you so much. This has been great. And I hope you all tune in next time to the Faculty Factory podcast.
Bye, Kim. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. The mission of the Faculty Factory is to build and support a community of leaders in faculty development who share tools, resources, wisdom, and encouragement in service to our faculty members, schools, and institutions. We encourage you to go to facultyfactory.org to find out more, get in touch with me, ask me any questions. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. We'll see you next time. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine Office of Faculty. For more information, visit facultyfactory.org.